जिसे कोई छूना नहीं चाहता, और दूसरा वो जिसे कोई छू नहीं सकता।
The talent I'm joined by today has been a very instrumental part, I think, in my sort of journey as a journalist. The first time we did an interview was actually for London Film Festival. Then throughout the course, we've done interviews for film for titles like A Suitable Boy, Bombay Begums, and now she's changed the game with a film called Santosh, which is premiering at the London Film Festival. And I'm so delighted to have Shahana Goswami once again with me on Filme Shilmy. So thank you so much, Shahana, for joining us.
Thank you, Anuj. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Yeah, we always seem to have a free-flowing conversation about everything in great depth and nuance. So I love it.
You know, honestly, I absolutely loved that chat that we did for A Suitable Boy. It was such a candid conversation that in
Yeah,
the pandemic, where Zoom was still a new thing for us and editing and
yeah.
everything was still a new thing for us. And it's so wonderful to kind of see this journey, I think, for both of us sort of come about. And I'm really happy to really be in conversation with you today. Well, look, congratulations, because Santosh is also UK's official entry to the Oscars, as well
That's right.
as it premiering at Cannes in the Uncertain Regard category. So, talk to me about these milestones as well as the premiere that's finally happening here in London too.
Well, I guess at the time we made the film, which was not so long back, we finished filming last October, end of last October. And, you know, the team worked endlessly and tirelessly to finish the film in time for submission for Cannes. And at that time, one didn't really think too much because, you have your fingers crossed and you have your heart full of wishes and hopes, but you kind of know that that's the first kind of, after Berlin, that's the first big festival that happens, and there's a stream of films that go in that are ready around that time. So, and then suddenly being told that it was selected for Un Certain Regard, which is actually the only other category that is in competition. So you have a separate jury for Un Certain Regard, and that's part of the competition, and then you have the main competition section. So that was a really, great position to be in because not too many films make it to the competition section. They make it to other sections, which are prestigious, of course, but are only showcasing the film. But
Hmm.
this was in competition, and of course that was the screen. That was our premiere, our world premiere, and the whole team was there. We were very excited. We had a lot of fun. I think we just ended up really soaking in, in the energy of being together again, all of our hard work paying off, and feeling that sense of joy and exhilaration at the fact that the film was in this prestigious category at Cannes. And then I think it was just a stream of reviews that came that were really heartwarming because for a film that is a British production but set and in Hindi language, set in the hinterland, written by an Indian but of a British but of Indian origin. It's a kind of complicated mix of things, and yet it managed to kind of be appreciated across the board. I mean, international critics as well as Indian critics all seem to have a really positive feedback, which is really great because sometimes a film gets divided in these international platforms. There are sometimes films are appreciated by the Occidental audience, but not the local audience. So it was nice to have that balance.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then just riding off that, the various other festivals. There was TIFF, there was Telluride, and now, of course, London Film Festival. So very excited for all these. There are, of course, other festivals that are happening as well. And soon after the announcement for the London Film Festival was the fact that it was the UK's official entry into
The Oscars.
for the foreign language, yeah, for the Oscars. I always like clarifying this because most people think, oh, it competed against all the films of the UK to get to this. It's the official selection for the foreign language category, which requires the film to not be in the English language.
Hmm.
So, in that sense, for the UK, it had to be a film that was not in English. And so, of course, amongst all the films that are UK productions that are not in English, Santosh happened to be the one that got selected. So, and it's only selected in terms of it being the entry. That's the other mistake people make, where they think, oh, you're going to the Oscars. And I was like, no, no, we have many steps to go. Still, it's just the official selection. There's going to be a short list and then a further short list, which becomes the nomination. So we have to still wait and watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, but anyways, not that the Oscars is ever a yardstick of a success of any film, to be very
Of
honest.
course.
Because
Of course.
I mean, there's so many great movies that have been snubbed by the Oscars, and that conversation is an entirely different conversation, which also require a lot of ranting. But anyways, coming to
Yeah.
Santosh, I think it was like I said, it was such a game-changing performance for you, especially because I think you've always had this knack of doing very internalized characters and having this very
Mm.
characters which do not are not loud in anything that they do. There's a very good sur, there's a good rhythm that they have, and I think here you also had that. But I think also I cannot even imagine how emotionally and mentally taxing it must have been for you to do such a character where you're investigating such a heinous crime, which simultaneously we're also witnessing in real life as well, with things that have unfolded in places like Kolkata. I mean, did you ever feel there was a bit of, I mean, obviously when you shot for this was much before then, but did you ever feel like there was a weird sense of dichotomy for you as an artist when you were exploring a character which is of a broken society, of a decaying society, um, as well as in the real and the real life aspects?
The thing is that through film, we actually get an opportunity to highlight aspects of life that we uh, feel affected by, and sometimes shield out of our reality because it's too much also. And certain things end up seeming almost like some sort of a normalcy, or something like, you always say, when there are 1,000 deaths in a war, you care less than when there is three people that die in a train accident. And there's something about the scale and the normalizing of death in a war, and similarly just the number of people that go, like, we talk about this all the time. As women, we've all grown up having some level of abuse at some point or the other, harassment. It's so part and parcel of life. It's a given, you know. And so there's this weird dichotomy where, on the one hand, these things almost feel like, oh, yet another, you know, and adding to an already existing massive pool of pre-existing similar situations. And then there is also this need to kind of somehow wish and hope that it's something that shifts and changes. And but it's a much larger process. So films, of course, give you the opportunity through the characters, through the storytelling, to really go down into deeper aspects of it. And I think especially in Santosh, because it becomes a kind of mirror. I've always said Santosh as being like a mirror.
Hmm.
It's a mirror being held up to you, and it's for you to see what you see in it, and how you feel about what you see in it, and how culpable and how responsible you feel towards things, and how you wish to change your interaction with the world around you. But it speaks of so many different aspects that all tie together. We cannot look at things in life where, let's say, when it comes to the way women are treated in India, there's a lot of um, uh, India's full of dichotomies. You'll have both extremes and everything in the middle. You'll
Hmm.
also have, the earliest female prime ministers, in the whole of the world, and chief ministers, and political involvement, and freedom struggles, and all of that, and having voting rights, and this, that, whatever. Plus, you will have the Devi, and then you'll have oppressed women, people being treated a certain way, controlled, suppressed, whatever. So you'll have everything in between as well.
Hmm.
So in that sense, India is very complex. But I think the film actually shows all the different socio-economic, socio-political aspects that make a larger narrative around certain themes and topics. So, yeah.
Very beautifully articulated, and I think this is where lens matters, and the voice and the tone which you adapt, because see, of course, like, I think for me, I'm always quite skeptical because I it gets a bit cumbersome sort of seeing like especially films that are made for Western or international audiences, where it's kind of made with the look that it's presenting India in a bit of as a third world country. Like I mean,
Mm.
there's been views where it's been made to kind of just seem like, oh, look how how poverty stricken it is, or look how divided it is, or all of these things. But I feel like with Santosh, what it does, it addresses these aspects and these topics, but it's also made in a very balanced manner, and it's very subtle. And I think subtlety is so important. And I think when you have a director like, of course, Sandhya Suri, who obviously, who had her voice set in the right tone from the onset, how does that make your work easier as an artist, to ensure that you continue that?
I mean, two things. One, at the level of just the script. I think each of us that were involved in it, our first engagement was the script, and it was such a well-written script. Sandhya had been working on it for a long period of time and had really finessed the nuances of it. I think at no point do you start, the minute you start swaying towards feeling a person is a certain way, they show another color, and you can never compartmentalize anyone in the film. Everybody has their shades of um,
Gray.
black and white and everything in between.
Mm.
So there's a constant moral, ethical conflict that you as an audience have in terms of, oh, was that okay or was it not okay, or maybe in this context it was okay, maybe it was not. You're constantly kind of, and there's a sense of empathy that you also have in situations that you may not have ordinarily had a sense of empathy because of the way you're seeing it in the context in which you're seeing it. So those kind of nuances, those kind of showing the subtle hypocrisies that exist actually in society, where on the one hand you feel oppressed, but you're also oppressing another aspect of society without even realizing it because it's so internalized in your psyche, right? So things like that, like those subtleties were really beautifully already captured in the script and in the screenplay by Sandhya. And then the fact that I think when I did my audition with her also, I realized that coming from a background of her having done documentaries where she has chased after reality and real things happening in front of camera and then created a story. When you go the other way around, it's harder, but your necessity for that real touch is very much there because that's what you're habituated to and that's what you're used to. So for her, it was very important to feel that sense of authenticity on camera, even though this was a different way because of creating reality as opposed to capturing and chasing reality as it exists in front of you. So that was a process which was very interesting, but at least we had that guarantee that Sandhya would only be okay with it if it genuinely felt right to her. And that's a sense of comfort that I always feel like I want to have with my director, where I know that they'll be relentless in their attempt to get the authenticity of the emotion and the moment that they wish for that character, for that scene.
Sure, no, absolutely. And I think there's one, I'm glad you mentioned the scene, because I think there's one scene in particular where I think you're eating, and then there's like a man who's making
Sharing,
you
yeah.
very uncomfortable, and you're basically choking on your food. There was that one scene which I think even Sandhya, for example, I think has definitely, that has been a highlight that stuck with her, I think, since
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
talk to me about that scene in particular. And again, we were talking about subtlety, and I think that's a very good example of that, because it's so touch and go. छू के जाती है, ऐसा नहीं है कि मतलब अच्छा उसको uncomfortable महसूस करानी है, like देखो empowerment दिखानी है तो फिर भारी भरकम dialogues करेगी या actions
Mm.
करेगी. It was very subtle. So how did that
Yeah.
pan out?
That was again also a beautiful moment that was always there in the script, and I thought it was so that was so ingenious actually, because we've all experienced this where at some point or the other someone's staring at you and you try all kinds of things, starting from avoidance, staring back at them, and oftentimes it nothing may work. And of course, I'll be fair, I feel like today it's a lot less, but when I was growing up it was a lot more, and I grew up in Delhi, so it was definitely a lot more. And so in that situation, I think, I don't know how Sandhya came up with this scene, but the way it plays out, it feels almost spontaneously created in that moment. And that is, Sandhya always imagines Santosh to be slightly unusual. Like she's not some sweet little naive girl. She's not some. She has a thing about her. She's you can't quite figure out. She's got a little uh cunning in her as well. That's why she's good at picking things up. She's got certain kind of smarts as well, and you can't really categorize her in kind of like a one cliched idea of a woman from India of a certain class and background. So in that scene particularly, I mean, I think what was really amazing is that flip it around by the person who's staring at you with a certain intention. What you end up doing in that moment is create a sense of disgust for them, and that becomes the point that makes them look away.
Hmm.
So that was just like you said, it was a subtle little moment in passing, but I think it's a beautiful scene, and it really kind of in the middle of everything. It's also the juxtapositioning of Santosh coming, being really out of sorts in a place where she's looking for someone. She's in a place that's reminding her of the death of her husband, and there's so many things going on for her that in that moment, that retaliation seems almost wickedly brilliant, but also out of nowhere.
Yeah. And I think even when I look at the poster, I think the picture of you standing amidst a crowd in the uniform, I think is so powerful. And
Yeah,
it speaks a lot, like how you mentioned the different strands about what she's going through, because I really like the humanized lens of cops. I feel honestly Indian content out of many of the world cinemas that I have seen, or the ones that I have seen at least, I'm very proud of the fact that we actually have the ability to portray a very humanized depiction of cops as well. For you, when you were donning that uniform, because obviously it's out of, for her it was also a way of getting her independence, right? It was also her doing
right.
for the country. So again, when there are these multiple strands coming in, especially through the lens of a cop, how does that lens also make a difference to you? Because obviously it's a role of great responsibility when you're playing a cop as well, isn't it? Because you want to make sure it doesn't come across as something which also in a way it kind of adds mistrust in the audience, because as it is, people do not trust cops. They already have a bad reputation. So did you ever feel
Mm.
that sense of added responsibility as well as an artist?
Um, yes and no, because I feel like you end up seeing all kinds of cops with different levels of um, ethics and ideas and moralities and their own delusions, their own conclusions of their own self-worth, and all of that. And the thing is that it's a system where there are all kinds of people. There will be people who are there for the passion of it. There will be people who are there because it's a job. It's a government job that is a security and a sense of stability for a family. So it's a complicated ecosystem when it comes to India. I don't know what it's like in any other part of the world, but in India, I know that it's so closely related to this dual aspect of power and stability and security that you get as being a government job. And and then of course there is the added element of you could also perhaps make money on the side.
Hmm.
Now whether everybody does it or not is no, nobody's saying everybody is doing that, but there is that option, and there are some people who will avail of it at a smaller level, at a higher level, at a really high level. There are possibilities. So I feel like again, because there is the aspect of the focus here was to reflect things as realistically as possible.
Hmm.
And I think in Sandhya's research also, I don't think that she had ever thought that it's all dark and gray and it's all fully corrupted and crazy and useless institution. I think she met lots of wonderful people. She's it's it's nuanced, and of course when you're telling a story, then you kind of use aspects that lend itself more to the story that may have been observed and watched and see built on based on things that you've seen and heard. And uh, but essentially it's about that creating that sense of nuance. So you have someone like a Sharma who on the one hand has certain ideals and certain things that she seems to be fighting for, but then she has her own inner battle with her sense of authority, power, insecurity, all of that,
Hmm.
right? And then you have a Santosh who's also figuring it out as she's going along, not coming from a certain any kind of expectation, but then learning that she has to kind of fight for her way and her position and her recognition, and then feeling that sense of safety and feeling held by a mentor, a person, and then again feeling that sense of disappointment.
Hmm.
So it's you see her go through, including being sucked
Hmm.
in moments of things, because certain things are treated as, this is fine, this is how it is. I mean, if you think about it, even smaller things we all have ended up participating in, whether it is, oh, we got caught by a cop, so we just gave them some money. I mean, you just know that that's a little bit of that happens on a regular basis,
Hmm.
in India, in big cities, or that little evasions that happen, like you buy a car in another state because it's cheaper and then you drive it down to save tax.
Hmm.
People are doing that all the time. And what happens is the larger number of people that are doing it, they normalize it. It makes it a normal thing to do. Or
Hmm.
let's say in an industry where people take kickbacks, it's normalized because 80% of the people are doing it.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's also showing that in society we all tend to feel comfortable with cheats and breaking rules depending on the number of people that are involved in it and how normalized it gets. So I think it depicts all those shades and aspects of being in the force, along with showing a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility, a sense of feeling like you could make a difference. So should you not make that effort to make a difference? Or the fact that there are so many people who might feel like that. Even the conversation that happens at the end where Sharma says, at the end of the day, there's only that much I can do. I also have people above me.
Hmm.
So when you realize that, your attitude towards things change. Whereas Santosh coming in as a new person, newcomer, she has a certain kind of idealism in the beginning that she lives up to, and through the journey of the film, you realize that idealism also, crumbles for her because she realizes that there are certain structural constraints to it.
Correct. Yeah, no, very, very beautifully said. But I think I want to talk a bit more about, your career at large, because I find a very interesting trajectory that you've had. So you've had your share of doing like commercial films as well.
Mm.
I mean, be it Rawan, of course, Heroine, Game, just to name a few on top of my head,
Mm.
Rock On. These are, very interestingly, the mainstream commercial films that you've had. They've been very urban city sort of oriented most of the time, right?
Mm.
And then when you've kind of veered into the, let's just say the non-commercial side, the more, I don't want to use the word niche, but art house. But if the sort of almost veering into the parallel cinema zone and the international sort of titles,
Right.
have mostly been characters which are very rooted. I mean, Zwigato is a very good example of that.
Mm. Mm.
Again, I love this sort of, we were talking about dichotomy, and it's interesting how the mainstream stuff you've done was city sort of characters mostly, and then the other ones that were more internationally recognized were more rooted characters. So what do you think has really contributed towards this retracing of you as an artist, I think, in these international titles that you've been given?
Well, one is, like you said, that a lot of the international projects are for a certain kind of audience, and there's again a system to how these things get greenlit, selected, this, that, and the other. So the, there is a certain kind of storytelling that of from India that is spotlit in that sense, right? So a lot of the projects that come out of it, and having said that, of course, India is 70% of India is that world, right? So there are people that want to tell stories of that world because that is the less represented world as well. So so a combination of the two creates this kind of larger chunk of indie films coming out of India that end up speaking of a certain strata and certain world.
Mm.
Like you said, I think when Tu Hai Mera Sunday was showing at the festival, I mean, I remember one of the things that we kept saying is that we're surprised that a upbeat, middle class, slightly upper middle class, happy, but very with a lot of depth film is chosen for a film festival,
Yeah,
because that doesn't happen, right? People
exactly.
don't want to choose those kind of things from India. So it's a combination of the two things, and I feel like um, I think things are changing to a large extent, and I think the focus essentially has become about storytelling. Yes, they could be set in a certain milieu, but I do I do hope that we would see more. Now, of course, now when I'm trying to think of any film that's selected that is not from that milieu, I'm finding it very hard to think of any film that isn't really from that kind of a more rooted rural setting. So, um, but
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I still would be hopeful for a different kind of different aspects of India. I feel like the focus should be on the characters and the storyline and the storytelling rather than the image and idea of India that gets associated with.
Thank you. You know what? Thank you so much for saying this. No, honestly, thank you for saying this because I feel like I- I'm a little exhausted, Shahana, if I'm honest, because I feel like I'm so tired of har bar. It's always a Gao ki story. It's always a
Yeah,
again, look, I absolutely love their voices being heard because I think, that's a very essential part of India. But there's so many different stories of India. I mean, Kiran Rao made a beautiful film many years ago called Dhobi Ghat, which again,
yeah,
through the lens of art, showcases also the working class, the ordinary
absolutely.
classes of India, as well as the rural sort of classes too. And I'm
Mm,
really exhausted and fatigued by this constant Western lens of India. Are
yeah,
things really changing, Shahana? Let's be honest, because it doesn't seem like it is. Because I still feel the Gao ki story, the poverty porn, and trauma porn stories are still being chosen to represent India on a global stage. And why do you think that is? And how can we changed that? I mean, Zwigato was a good game changer in that sense because it had a bit of both. It had the sort of story about a struggling family, but it was also someone who was also navigating the urban world as well. And I think
yeah.
you know what I mean. So how do you think we can change this? Will it ever change?
No, I am hopeful that it will change. I think it's very slowly beginning to change. I mean, let's say even a film that comes to mind, like a film like Sir, even
Yes.
though the focal point was, of course, Tilottama's character who's playing a housemaid, but you do see the urban life of the character played by Vivek Gombar. So it's a kind of intermixing of these two very extreme worlds, showcasing both aspects of it. And because there is a kind of connection between the two, and you see it from both lenses. So at least there is some aspect of you seeing a very rich urban India as well.
Hmm.
So I do feel and hope that these things are slowly shifting and changing. And I think it needs to be a bit of both. It needs to be, of course, the fact that, let's say, people like these film labs that are there, which then help a project to get financing. And because independent cinema is difficult to be produced entirely in India, so it is always looking for funding from other places. And for those, you end up going to certain labs, to certain things. Now, those spaces need to allow for more diverse and nuanced narratives to come out, and people who are writing from India and who are creating work also have to be able to be confident enough to take a story that might represent another part of the Indian reality, the modern urban reality of India, knowing that that can also make the cut.
Yeah.
And the more of that coming into these spaces, the more it stands a chance of both these things coming together and allowing for another aspect of India being seen.
Yes, very well said. And I think often we speak about how the capitalist sort of approach, especially of big industries like the mainstream Hollywood and Bollywood sort of emulating and jumping on a bandwagon of remaking. But actually, people don't talk about this enough in independent cinema as well, or the, let's just say, the art house or the film festival films, about how I feel Satyajit Ray made masterpieces back in the 50s and the 60s.
Absolutely.
But I feel what's happened is that people have continued in their way of emulating that, just because obviously those films were very progressive for their times, undoubtedly, but people are trying to emulate that today and trying to get that Western validation as well. And people don't talk about that, is how that machinery works in independent cinema as well, where they're trying to emulate things which existed back then, which might not necessarily be, relevant today. Do you know what I mean? In that sense of,
Right. Yeah.
that's not to say that his films aren't, of course they are, but times have changed. The pressures of people.
Yeah.
So do you also feel like there is this bandwagon of
Also, Satyajit Ray made many films that were of various classes. He made very
exactly.
high-end zamindar stories, and your Pathir Pachali, which was like really down to like the poorest of the poor. So it's not like he had one aspect of India that was shown, but yeah.
Exactly, and thank you for saying that, because I just feel like people बस ये पकड़ते हैं, अच्छा गरीब की story है ये, चलो ये
Mm.
Oscar मिलेगा हमें. And also
Yeah.
Slumdog Millionaire is definitely to be blamed here, but do you think this whole emulation thing has continued over time, and do you think it's also kind of somewhat changing now a little bit as well? I mean, what's your opinion on this?
I do think it's changing, but like we said, that it's anything to do with media in that sense or art. The it's always a demand and supply thing,
Hmm.
and I feel like the people who are greenlighting, who are facilitating, who are helping um, projects take off, have to be able to take those kinds of more daring, more creatively driven, more forward thinking decisions. And people need to be able to repeatedly keep showcasing a certain kind of narrative style as a part of their own expression rather than going to the fallbacks of the stories that they think will get selected. It's a vicious cycle, right? Like if you know that those are the kind of projects that are more likely to get funding, to get whatever, you are also going to cater to that as a filmmaker or a writer because you want your work to be seen. And of course, maybe you have some sort of a calling or a pull towards that subject. But maybe there are seven other things that you have written which you feel may not fit into that realm, and so you're not going to even approach it. So
Hmm.
the more we have um, people writing more nuanced stories of different classes, different backgrounds, different work. Like I just did this project, which was it's called 4 Years Later, which is an Australian show for Australian television,
Wow.
but it actually the two leads are Indian Indians, me and Akshay Singh, the other actor, and we speak in Indian English because we are Indian characters, and it's about immigration and about a love story between a couple that gets separated between India and Australia, and then how they meet 4 years later and what their relationship is like and how it's evolving and changing. Now that show is produced and made for an Australian audience,
Hmm.
and of course, hopefully, will be then transported to and be picked up by other OTT platforms across the world. But you're seeing Indian Indians speak English, and that being their main language of communication, which is true in my case.
Hmm.
In my world, there's so many people who were middle class, upper middle class, who grew up in English medium schools, who speak to each other in English largely. And that's a world that you don't get to see, where you're constantly flitting between languages and cultural references and things. But English is my first language. If you are, I mean, there's so many of us for whom English is our first language. Now that's a reality, but that reality doesn't get depicted, like you said. So my hope is that more and more of that will start showing its face
Hmm.
with our generation of people coming into the creative space
Sure.
and the creative producer space, hopefully. So yeah, I do have hope for it.
Yeah, and thank you so much again. This is exactly why I love like speaking with you, Shana, is this openness and this directness that we have. And I think what I really value about you as an artist is that you're someone who is very balanced. I think, in your approach as an artist. You're not someone who endorses in cancel culture or endorses like canceling pieces of art because you disagree with it personally. Like,
Yeah,
I think what's happened in society right now, like दो तरह की extremism है. देखो लेफ्ट साइड पे और राइट साइड पे दोनों पे extremism है.
bilkul.
Right
Yes,
is canceling the left, and the left are definitely canceling the right. And I just think that there
yeah,
whole sense where art is being suppressed in the name of ideologies, conflicting ideologies, which I think is terrible, because there might
yeah,
be things that I disagree with, like heavily, but I feel
yeah.
art should have its space. So at a time like this where art is going through a bit of a bit of a churning at the moment in that sense, and a bit of a difficult time, how does that make you feel as an artist? And do you feel like it's so difficult to remain level-headed and neutral at a time when times are so divided and ideologies are so divided at this current stage?
I mean, I think what's essential is to be true to what I think we live in times where your own authentic expression and ideology and understanding is very important. I think a lot of people end up focusing. I mean, a lot of people who are either on either sides have actually appropriated that position from their peers, from their parents, from their community. It's not necessarily their own. It's not their own. They've not even necessarily sat with what they really believe in and what they don't. It's a kind of, you know, huddling together with a community that you trust, or a bunch of people that you just kind of blindly trust and you want to kind of fit in with.
Hmm.
So today, I think what really has, I feel, has become the like requirement of society is for people to find their own true, unique, authentic voice, which may not sit anywhere clearly between the left and the right and their different opinion. It could be nuanced. You could, you could be in agreement with one aspect of the left, one aspect of the right. But the point is to be able to a have the gumption to express yourself with your own belief and not something that you've just appropriated from someone else. Be able to hold space for someone else's opinion that might be drastically opposite to yours and making you feel a certain way, but that's your problem.
Hmm.
The person should have the space to express themselves. You can have space for conversation, for disagreement, for argument, for whatever, but it cannot be a my position is right and yours is wrong. That that I mean that for any ideology, any viewpoint, any opinion, to me is redundant. You're on mute.
Yep, sorry. So one final question before we go. Obviously, I think, personally speaking, Santosh has been definitely a film that has really given you that appreciation. I think Anupama Chopra had once said that, you've always deserved better. I think she mentioned something along those lines when she interviewed in Cannes. And I
Yes.
honestly agree with her. I think, I feel like, you've always had this spark as an actor, and you've definitely shown even in the commercial spaces as well in the films that you've done. But somehow, that validation that one also yearns for as an artist, I feel like somehow you've not got that, but I think with Santosh it's definitely happened as well as an artist. Going forward now, how do you wish things pan out for you as an actor after Santosh, after a robust performance like this? And secondly, um, you mentioned this Australian drama, which sounds really great, but what else can we look forward to from you as well as an artist? So, two-part question as a final question.
I'll start with the shorter answer, which is the second. So there's 4 years later, which is the Australian web TV series, it's an 8-part series, and it's for SBS, and the showrunner and writer and creator of it is Mithila Gupta, and so that hopefully should be getting its distribution across different parts of the world in on different platforms and showing soon. And then I have Tanu Bell's film Dispatch, which I had we made a while back, which is showing at Mami very soon, and then subsequently will be releasing in a few months from then um, on an OTT platform as well. And other than that, I haven't signed on to anything specific right now, but there are a couple of projects again that are, funnily enough, one is more the rural and one is much more the urban. So it's a interesting mix again, and both are indie projects. So that gives me hope again that there are two types that can still exist. In terms of what my expectations and where would I like to be, that's a good question because I feel today I'm in a different place, more not so much to do with Santosh and what has happened immediately, but I feel like, as we grow as human beings and at a soul level, at a psychological level, at an emotional level, we also kind of, what we aspire and what we want and what we're capable of um, handling or wanting keep shifting. So I feel like right now I'm in a stage where I'm ready for big. I'm ready for like really big stuff. I want the experience of working on a massive scale project. I want to be able to shoulder something that's massive. I want to be working with people that I'm intimidated by and then be able to be a co-creator with them. And I want it to be something that is large scale in terms of both its reach, its creativity, its artistry, uh, and the collaborative nature of the people that are coming together in it. So right now I'm really manifesting that aspect because that's an experience that I've not entirely had, and I feel I'm ready for it. I wasn't ready for it a few years back. I wasn't ready for it 10 years ago. I wasn't ready for it when I started out my career 19 years ago. But today I'm ready for it. And I can pull it in towards me now with the great assurance that I can handle it and that I have something to contribute to it as well.
Oh, I absolutely think you can. Honestly, Shahan, this was such another very beautiful, beautiful conversation. Honestly, I feel like this is going to probably be a highlight of our publication whenever we have our 10th anniversary or something. I think this will definitely be a really important part of that. But thank you so much, honestly, for such a wonderful interview. It's always so insightful to hear your views, and I think it's also very refreshing to have an artist that is really trying to bring back the center in this very divided world that we live in. And I think we it's so important to have actors like yourself really champion that. And thank you for the art that you always represent on screen. It's always so wonderful to watch you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anuj. Thank you. As always, a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, definitely.
Thank
And
you.
London calling once again, so hopefully I'll see you soon.
Yes, absolutely. Take care.
Yeah.